The call came in just after dawn. It was Friday, September 26th, 2025. The kind of morning where the crisp autumn air usually promised football games and cozy sweaters. But on this day, on this quiet suburban street, the air was thick with something else. Something heavy. Detective Miles Corbin arrived to a scene bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars. Neighbors stood on their lawns, clutching coffee mugs, their faces a mixture of fear and, morbid curiosity. They whispered. They pointed. They all pointed to the same house. The one with the perfectly manicured lawn and the cheerful yellow door. It was the home of Mark and Sarah Jennings, a home that from the outside looked like any other. But inside, it was a different world entirely. Corbin pushed past the yellow tape, his breath catching in his throat. The first thing that hit him was the silence. It was a profound, unnatural quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. Then the smell. A coppery, metallic scent that every cop knows and dreads. He followed his partner, Detective Lena Petrova, into the living room. The scene was chaotic. A whirlwind of overturned furniture and shattered glass. A struggle had clearly taken place here. A violent, desperate struggle. It was a stark contrast to the family photos still smiling from the mantelpiece. Pictures of happier times, of vacations and holidays. Pictures that now seemed like ghosts from another life. A life that had ended right here, in this room. They found her in the master bedroom, Sarah Jennings. The brutality of it all made even a veteran like Corbin take a step back. He had seen a lot in his 20 years on the force. He had seen the worst of what people could do to each other. But this was different. It was personal. The rage was palpable, left behind in the room like a physical presence. Petrova, usually stoic and unshakable, simply shook her head, her face pale. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a storm of pure, unadulterated fury. And someone had directed it all at Sarah. The question wasn't just who did this, but why? What could have provoked such a savage attack? As the forensics team began their meticulous work, dusting for prints and collecting fibers, Corbin stood in the doorway, trying to piece it together. He looked at the wedding photo on the nightstand. Mark and Sarah beaming, full of hope and promise. They looked so happy, so in love. He wondered where Mark was. The initial report said he was the one who called 911. He claimed he had just returned from a business trip. Found her like this. It was a story Corbin had heard before, too many times before. He knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that this case would be a long and winding road. A road that would lead into the darkest corners of a seemingly perfect marriage. Mark Jennings sat in a sterile interview room at the precinct, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. He was the picture of a grieving husband. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice choked with emotion as he recounted his story. He'd been away on a 3-day business trip, a conference in a city a few hours away. He had texted Sarah when he left, and she had wished him a safe drive. Everything was normal. Completely and utterly normal. He described their life together in glowing terms. They were college sweethearts, he said. Best friends. They had built a beautiful life, a beautiful home. They were even talking about starting a family soon. To anyone listening, Mark and Sarah Jennings had it all. He was a successful architect, she a beloved elementary school teacher. They were active in their community, the kind of couple everyone liked. Friends described them as inseparable, the perfect match. They hosted barbecues in the summer and elaborate holiday parties in the winter. Their social media pages were a curated gallery of happiness smiling selfies, scenic vacation photos, and loving tributes on birthdays and anniversaries. From the outside, their marriage was a fortress. It was solid, enviable, and built on a foundation of trust and shared dreams. No one saw any cracks. No one suspected a thing. But detectives are trained to look for the cracks, even the smallest ones. As Corbin listened to Mark's story, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Mark's grief, while seemingly profound, felt rehearsed. He answered questions a little too quickly, his narrative a little too polished. He spoke of Sarah in the past tense, which was normal, but there was a detachment to his words. It was as if he was describing a character in a book, rather than the woman he had promised to love and cherish. Petrova felt it too. She watched him from behind the one-way mirror, her arms crossed. Something was off. The perfect picture was just a little too perfect. The background checks began immediately. Detectives started digging into the couple's finances, their phone records, their lives. They spoke to Sarah's colleagues at the school, who described her as bubbly and dedicated, but maybe a little distant in recent months. They talked to the couple's friends, who all echoed the same sentiment. They were the perfect couple. But one friend, a close confidant of Sarah's, hesitated. She mentioned that Sarah had seemed stressed lately. She had been working late more often and seemed to be guarding her phone more closely than usual. It was a small detail, a tiny thread. But for the detectives, it was the first sign that the fortress of the Jennings marriage might not have been as impenetrable as it seemed. The first real break in the case didn't come from a witness or a fingerprint. It came from the cold digital world that Sarah Jennings had left behind. The forensics team had managed to unlock her phone, and what they found opened up a secret second life. Buried beneath innocuous texts from her mother and appointment reminders were messages from a man named Alex. The conversations were not innocent. They were filled with stolen moments, secret meetings, and declarations of a love that was passionate and forbidden. The whispers that detectives had been searching for were screaming from the screen. Sarah Jennings was having an affair. Alex Ryder was a local photographer, a handsome, free-spirited artist who seemed to be the complete opposite of the stable, predictable Mark Jennings. He and Sarah had met months earlier at a gallery opening. According to their texts, what started as a casual friendship quickly blossomed into a torrid romance. They met for coffee that turned into lunch, for lunch that turned into secret afternoons in rented hotel rooms. They had created a bubble for themselves, a world away from Sarah's life on the quiet suburban street. They were planning a future, a life together. Alex had just finalized his divorce. He was ready. He was pushing Sarah to leave Mark. The discovery of the affair changed everything. The motive was no longer a mystery shrouded in shadows. It was now blindingly clear. This wasn't about money or a robbery. This was about passion, betrayal, and jealousy, a classic love triangle. Now the detectives had two prime suspects instead of one. The grieving husband, who may have discovered his wife's infidelity and snapped in a fit of rage, and the passionate lover, who might have become impatient, pushing for a future that Sarah wasn't ready to embrace. Both men had a powerful reason to want Sarah and perhaps a powerful reason for her to end up dead. Corbin and Petrova brought Alex Ryder in for questioning. He was a different kind of man from Mark. Where Mark was composed and polished, Alex was raw and emotional. When he learned of Sarah's death, he broke down completely. His grief was messy, real, and gut-wrenching. He admitted to the affair freely, almost proudly. He said he loved Sarah, that she was his soulmate. He claimed he was the one who could make her truly happy, unlike her cold and controlling husband. He told the detectives that Sarah was terrified of Mark. She had been planning to leave him, he insisted. She was just waiting for the right moment. The interrogation room felt smaller with Mark Jennings in it for the second time. The air was thick with unspoken questions. This time, Detective Corbin didn't start with pleasantries. He placed a printed-out stack of text messages on the metal table between them, the messages between Sarah and Alex. Mark stared at them, his face a mask of stone. He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He simply looked up at Corbin, his eyes cold and steady. "I had no idea," he said, his voice flat. He claimed he was shocked, devastated, betrayed. He painted himself as the victim, a man doubly wounded by the loss of his wife and the discovery of her secret life. Corbin pushed harder. He laid out the timeline. He talked about the rage evident at the crime scene, the kind of rage that comes from a deep personal wound. A man finds out his wife is cheating on him, planning to leave him, Corbin said, his voice low and even. He might get angry. He might lose control. It happens, Mark. But Mark didn't break. He stuck to his story. He was a loving husband, blindsided by tragedy and betrayal. He insisted he was at the conference, 200 miles away, when Sarah was killed. He had witnesses, receipts, a hotel keycard. His alibi seemed solid. He was calm, collected, and utterly convincing in his denial. Meanwhile, Detective Petrova was re-examining Alex Ryder's story. His grief had been compelling, but emotion wasn't evidence. He claimed he was at his studio all night, working on a project, but he worked alone. There were no witnesses to confirm his whereabouts during the estimated time of death. He also admitted that he and Sarah had argued the day before she was killed. He was frustrated, he said, because she had once again postponed telling Mark she was leaving. He wanted to start their life together, and her hesitation was hurting him. It was a heated argument full of passion and frustration. Could that frustration have boiled over into violence? The two men were perfect foils for each other. Mark, the wronged husband with a seemingly airtight alibi, but a cold demeanor that set off alarm bells. Alex, the passionate lover with raw, believable grief, but no alibi and a clear motive of frustration. The detectives were split. Corbin was convinced Mark was their man. The husband is always the prime suspect, and Mark's calculated coolness felt more sinister than Alex's emotional outburst. Petrova, however, wasn't so sure. She argued that Alex's passion could be a double-edged sword. The same fire that fueled his love for Sarah could have fueled a deadly rage when he felt she was slipping away. The investigation was at a crossroads. The case hinged on Mark's alibi, the business conference. It was the rock he clung to, the one thing that placed him far from the scene of the crime. The detectives had to either verify it completely or shatter it. They started by digging deeper. They confirmed he had checked into his hotel. They confirmed he had paid for his room. They even found a colleague who remembered seeing him at the opening reception on the first night. But the second day, the day Sarah was murdered, the details became fuzzy. No one could definitively place him at the conference sessions. He was just around, a ghost in the machine. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a toll booth camera and GPS data. The team decided to trace the route from the conference hotel back to Mark and Sarah's home. It was a long shot, but modern cars are treasure troves of data. They subpoenaed the records for Mark's luxury sedan, and there it was, a digital breadcrumb trail that completely contradicted his story. The car's GPS showed it leaving the hotel parking garage late on the second night of the conference. It showed the car traveling 200 miles south, straight back to his hometown. It then showed the car parked just a few blocks away from his own house for several hours, during the exact window of Sarah's murder. The pieces started falling into place with terrifying speed. The toll booth camera footage confirmed it. At 1:17 a.m., Mark's car was captured passing through a toll plaza just 30 minutes from his home. The driver was alone, his face illuminated for a split second by the flash of the camera. It was unmistakably Mark Jennings. He had lied. He wasn't 200 miles away in a hotel room. He was right there, lurking in the shadows near his own home. He had driven for hours under the cover of darkness, fueled by a rage he had kept hidden behind a calm exterior. The perfect alibi was a carefully constructed lie. Corbin felt a cold satisfaction as he looked at the grainy photo from the toll booth. This was it. This was the crack that would break the case wide open. Mark hadn't just been betrayed, he had known about the affair. But how? The detectives went back to the digital evidence, this time focusing on Mark's devices. They found spyware installed on Sarah's phone, software that Mark had secretly downloaded. He had been reading her texts. He had been tracking her movements. He knew everything. He knew about Alex. He knew she was planning to leave. He hadn't just stumbled upon her betrayal, he had been watching it unfold in real time, his anger simmering. Armed with the GPS data and the toll booth photo, the detectives brought Mark Jennings in one last time. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was different now. The pretense was gone. Corbin didn't bother with questions. He simply laid the evidence on the table, piece by piece. First, the printouts of the spyware logs from Sarah's phone, then the GPS map showing the car's late-night journey, and finally, the grainy but undeniable photo of Mark's face behind the wheel, time-stamped and damning. He placed it directly in front of Mark. "The conference ended early for you, didn't it, Mark?" Corbin asked quietly. For a long moment, Mark just stared at the photo. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The composure he had maintained for days dissolved, replaced by a wave of raw, ugly emotion. The grief he had performed earlier was nothing compared to the torrent of rage and self-pity that poured out of him now. He began to talk. He confessed everything. He had found out about the affair weeks ago. He had installed the spyware, obsessed with knowing every detail of her betrayal. He read the texts where she called Alex her soulmate, where she planned their future, a future without him. He watched, digitally, as the woman he loved fell in love with someone else. On that final night, he read a text from Sarah to Alex. "I'm telling him tomorrow," she wrote. "I'm finally ready. I'm leaving him." That was the moment he snapped. He described the drive home as a blur of fury. He parked a few blocks away and walked to the house, letting himself in with his key. Sarah was shocked to see him. He confronted her, holding up his phone, showing her that he knew everything. The argument was explosive. It moved from the living room to the bedroom. His carefully controlled world was collapsing. and he couldn't stand it. In his confession, he claimed he didn't remember the specifics of the attack. He said he just blacked out in a red haze of rage. The confession was chilling. It was a story not of a sudden loss of control, but of a calculated fury that had been building for weeks. He had stewed in his jealousy, meticulously planning his response. The drive home wasn't a spontaneous act. It was a mission. He intended to confront her, and when she confirmed his worst fears, he unleashed the violence he had been nurturing. The detectives listened, the grim reality of the crime settling heavily in the room. The picture of the perfect husband was now replaced by the portrait of a possessive, controlling man who would rather see his wife dead than with someone else. The verdict was swift. With Mark Jennings's detailed confession and the mountain of digital evidence against him, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who couldn't bear the thought of his wife leaving him would now spend the rest of his life locked away, his world reduced to a concrete cell. In the courtroom, his face was once again a mask of stone, devoid of the emotion he had shown during his confession. He accepted his fate with the same chilling detachment with which he had planned his wife's murder. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But the echoes of the tragedy rippled far beyond the courtroom walls. Sarah's family was left to grapple with an unbearable dual grief: the violent loss of their daughter and the horrifying knowledge that the man they had welcomed into their family as a son was her killer. They had to reconcile the image of the charming, successful architect with the monster who had committed such a heinous act. For Alex Ryder, the outcome brought no peace. He was consumed by guilt, tormented by the what-ifs. What if he hadn't pushed her so hard to leave? What if they had just run away? He had lost the woman he loved and was left with only the ghost of a future that would never be. For the detectives, it was another closed case, but one that left a lasting mark. Detective Corbin found himself looking at the smiling faces in family photos with a new sense of cynicism. He had seen firsthand how a picture of perfection could hide a dark and rotting core. The case was a stark reminder that the most violent storms often brew in the quietest of places, behind the closed doors of seemingly happy homes. It reinforced a grim truth of his profession. You never truly know what goes on in a marriage, and love, when it sours, can curdle into the most potent of poisons. In the end, it was a simple, tragic story, one that has been told in different forms throughout human history. A story of love, betrayal, and possession. Sarah Jennings wanted a different life, a chance at a new beginning. Mark Jennings, unable to accept a life without her, chose to end hers instead. There was no winner in this devastating love triangle. There were only losers. A young woman's life was brutally cut short, and two men were left with ruined futures, one behind bars, the other in a prison of his own grief. And on a quiet suburban street, a cheerful yellow door stands as a silent monument to the terrible secrets it once kept.